in addition to shutting it down sector by sector, there's another technology that I was shown that could just shut off the whole Starlink constellation, meaning it's gone. It doesn't shred it; it just ceases to function. But the Russians are responding with their own analog. They they are using, and again, I'm not a technologist, so I'm still trying to work this thing out. I got an idea how it works, but they call it mesh. It's like a mesh internet capability, but basically the Russians are able to send a constellation of drones into Ukrainian territory that communicate using internet connectivity.
Yeah.
It can't be jammed, and they're just dominating. So all this stuff you're reading right now about what the Ukrainians are doing, understand that it's going to stop happening in totality pretty soon because the Russians are going to shut it down. The Ukrainians have their own mesh technology, and they are able to run some interesting drone strike, but the Russians are aware of this. Nothing's happening. I've never seen people so unpanicked in my life. I mean, I'm sitting there in Melitopol pooping my pants because of the drone threat. And the Russians I'm hanging out with, they're like, don't worry about it. Smilich. We got this. Let me
Well,
explain to you.
yeah, this was something that Putin himself exuded confidence about when he surrounded himself with non-commissioned infantry officers there on Russia Day. They were complaining about Starlink and how they were unable to cope with it. And they suggest, yeah, we're working on it. Belousov, you got this under control? Yeah, we got it under control. So now let me ask you just a couple of specific questions. Tomahawks, are they going into Germany?
Well, the
That
Germans,
was one of the deals mentioned, I think, at the NATO summit in Ankara.
yeah, the NATO summit, what they're talking about is the Germans right now have they're producing, they're getting ready to bring in to production the Patriot GEMT, which is a PAC-2 with special technology enhancements. It
Any
can't
aircraft?
it,
Any
it,
aircraft?
it can shoot down it can anti-aircraft, and it can shoot down like the Caliber cruise missile, things like
Huh.
that. Can't touch the Iskander M. It can't touch hypersonics. Only the PAC-3 has the potential to do that, and even that can't do it. But the motor production facility that they built for that, and they're talking about building for ATACMS, has the potential of expanding into a Tomahawk motor production facility.
Okay. All
That's
right.
that's what they're talking about. And the Germans are saying we want to be able to receive the license for Tomahawk to do this. Um,
Mhm.
but again, there's a whole bunch of questions about, the licensing and all that stuff.
Right.
A lot of talk, but even if they did it, uh, the first of all, the Tomahawk is not seen as a threat by the Russians.
Mhm.
I'll just say that right now. They've they know
It
how to
can't
shoot.
carry it can't carry nukes.
Even if it carries a nuke, then the Russians aren't worried about that
Okay.
because the Russians have made it clear that if you use a nuclear weapon against us, everybody dies. We don't,
Hmm.
it's there's no debating this point. So hopefully everybody gets that point that if you use a nuke against Russia, everybody dies.
Yeah,
Everybody.
Scott, a related question just to get my mind straight. Uh, the NATO summit in Washington, I think 2.5 years ago or so, there was a side deal between Scholz, the chancellor then, and Biden. We're going to put the kind of middle range ballistic missiles in Germany by mutual agreement, just the two of them, the same kind that were prohibited by the INF treaty. What became of that?
Trump killed it. The Dark Eagle was
Mhm.
supposed to be deployed to Germany this summer, and it's over. There will be no Dark Eagle deployment to Germany.
Why is that?
Well, there's a couple reasons. One, the technology doesn't work. Um,
Okay.
and two,
Picky,
uh,
picky, 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 picky. I'm sorry.
two, I think that the United States is not happy with Germany right now. And this is why I think it's pie in the sky to think the United States is suddenly going to give Germany licensing rights to the Tomahawk. Um, and again, I'm curious about what's going to happen with ATACMS going forward. Um, the other thing people need to understand is the United States is as politically unstable as Europe is right now. We got midterm elections coming up where Trump could lose the House. And if anybody thinks that Trump is going to get the rubber stamp out of you know, um, Jeffries run house that he's getting out of Johnson run houses, I think you're wrong. I think that a Democrat controlled house is going to be about impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. And so I just think that, again, you know, I look at all the attention being given to Ankara right now, and I'm just like, none of this is all the political leadership in there, with the exception of maybe Erdogan, are temporary. Who's going to last? I mean, Trump 2028, no matter what, he's gone. Mertz gone. Macron gone. Starmer already gone. Just hasn't been replaced yet. The point is, I mean, even Meloni, I mean, she has to be careful. She has to be careful. She's Italian. Italians don't have a history of political stability. So she needs to be careful too. It's just, there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of social media echo chambering going on. But when you come down to the reality, there's only one smoothly consistent player right now, and his name's Vladimir Putin, and he's not worried. And it doesn't mean that he's detached, because I thought, because I listened to him in St. Petersburg, and then I got to the Donbass, and I got to to Lugansk, and I know where he gets his calmness from. He gets his calmness from the Russian people, especially the closer you get to the front line, the calmer the people get. You can get in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and you'll find these little nervous Nellies running around. Oh, well. But the vast majority of people, I mean, again, the Russians are just, they don't care about, they don't wake up going, oh no, an oil tank blew up outside of Moscow. Some nervous Nellies do, but most of them go, oh, well, they'll take care of it. We'll get on. Oh, you're paying a little bit more for gas. Yeah, we are. It's a pain in the ass. You got to wait in line today to get gas. Yeah, but let's wait 4 days. See, that's the other thing. All these lines they keep talking about. You know how consistent, you know where the lines are today that were 4 days ago? They don't exist. Why? Because Russia has brought in fuel and brought them to the tank. The only place you have a problem is in Crimea. But even in Crimea, most of the gas stations have reopened. People just don't talk about that.
One more question, if Joe will allow it. The Rasputitsa, the wet season at the end of September. I'm just wondering if the Russians have the capability and the will to finish those last strongholds after Konstantinovka before those rains come. And what do you think, Scott? Do you think they're going to do it, or do you think they'll sort of just keep chipping away, attriting?
Well, I think they're going to try. I think, I mean, there's no doubt that they're trying. But there's also no doubt that, they aren't going to sacrifice needless casualties. This concept of human wave assaults, that means you don't have any clue what's going on in the battlefield. There's no human wave assaults. The assaults are being done in groups of 3, in groups of 6, in groups of 9. It's a very tenuous assault forward with fire support, drone support. You got the enemy drones coming in. Sometimes that stalls your attack. The Ukrainian drone, the one thing the Russians says, they respect the hell out of the Ukrainian drone operators. They said they have great technology, and they do. They have great technology. It's all given to them free by the West. And they got a lot of drones. And it causes problems. There's times where the Russians are overwhelmed by drones. And then when that happens, the assault stops. You can't do an assault. Drones are picking you off. And they do suffer casualties. There's no doubt about that. But the Russians, when that happens, they don't panic. They have specialty units, Rubicon. I was supposed to get an interview. Rubicon is a specialty Russian drone unit. And I was lined up to interview them and all this stuff, but they are too sensitive right now. The Russians are like, you go talk to these guys, and you can talk to these, but this one we don't want you to touch because you'll see too much. But the Rubicon is a hit team. When Rubicon comes in, Rubicon goes in and kills every Ukrainian drone operator in its sector of operations and pushes the Ukrainian drones back. And then the Russians come in with their own drones, flooded in there, take control, and begin the advance again. It's a hard war. There's nothing easy about what's going on right now. It's very hard, very difficult, but the Russians are winning. They're prevailing. They're pushing forward. And at some point in time, as I said, the Ukrainians, they have put a lot of emphasis on drone warfare. They've flooded the area. I mean, 80,000 drone operators were trained. They're all dying right now. Literally all dying. On a daily basis, they're losing 6, 12, 18 at a time, and they can't be replaced. These are skilled operators that can't be replaced. The difference between going out there and flying your standard your radio controlled drone in the early days.
Mhm.
That's not how it works anymore. You have to have a drone operator who understands when he's being jammed,
Yeah.
how to click over to the next frequency, how to shut
Mhm.
down. They're playing games with this. But then you have the fiber optic drones. That's a whole different skill set. And then you have the mesh internet drones, another skill set. And you have to know when to use them and how to combine them. And this takes time, 6 months just to be able to master it. And all the 6 months operators are dying right now.
Yeah.
The Russians are killing them, slaughtering them. And so when the Ukrainians lose the drone front, because they have the ability to put a drone wall up right now, they're losing that ability. And when they lose that ability and they lack maneuver forces to fill the gap, the Russians will surge forward. And I think what the Russians are planning on in the month of August and September is that there's going to be a deficit of Ukrainian capacity, and the Russians are going to be able to go in. They may not be able to take Kramatorsk or Slovyansk by rainy season, but they'll have troops in those cities dug in. And then I think you're going to see also in the wintertime, there will be that the Russians are preparing units to operate aggressively in a winter environment. That because this winter the Ukrainians will have no energy this winter, none. They'll have no fuel for their army. They'll have no heat for their civilian population. It's going to be a dark, black winter, but the no fuel for their army is going to be the killer because this isn't going to be a situation where both armies are static. This is going to be a situation where the Ukrainians have nothing, zero. They can't resupply. The Russians will have drone dominance, and then the Russians are going to come in and they're just going to grind them on down. Though I don't know if the Russians are going to be able to take the Donbass by the end of summer. I think Putin would love it. Who wouldn't? But the Ukrainians are putting up effective resistance. They're very determined. But the
Mhm.
Russians are better. And I think what you're going to see is the Russians are going to push to get a toehold in each one of these urban environments. Then the rainy season, the Russians will be able to resupply. The Ukrainians won't. Whatever troops they have are going to be starving. They're going to be hungry. They're going to have no ammunition. And then the weather's going to get where maneuver comes in and it's going to be over. До свидания. Все.
From the tactical to the strategic, if could have one more question, Finland and Lithuania have said that they're going to allow nuclear weapons to be deployed on their soil. At least the Finns have said that. Their president, the Lithuanians have to go through their Congress. Uh, I could make a case that that could become a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. I mean, it's bad enough they're trying to get Ukraine into NATO with the long border they have with Finland and Lithuania. I don't know. Do you think this is real, Scott? Do you think that the Finns, who would give them these nuclear weapons? Would the U.S. or would it have to come from Britain or France? Do you have any thoughts on this? Because I think this is a really big strategic uh, challenge for Putin.
No, it's a big problem. It's France is causing most of the problems right now. It's the French who are offering to provide Rafale, nuclear-equipped Rafale fighters to operate off of Finnish air bases. But again, this becomes a self-solving problem when Macron leaves and Le Pen becomes president. Then there will be no French nuclear presence in Finland. So I think on Lithuania. I don't think it's American, nuclear weapons because first of all, well, it doesn't matter. It's a wild, wild west. Because understand this, that a French Rafale with a nuclear weapon in Finland is not a NATO weapon. Because in order to be a NATO weapon, the NATO Nuclear Committee has to agree to it, and it has to be part of the NATO nuclear strategy, and Finland has to. And this creates all sorts of problems for Finland in terms of the nuclear nonproliferation treaty and things like that. Finland has no idea what kind of headache they're creating for themselves. Russia's already told them that you're now a nuclear target. So that's a new reality that Finland has to deal with, and they don't understand that. But the thing is, the political will here. This is Emmanuel Macron literally committing suicide. The French have to understand, and the Russians have tried to make this point, that it's just one Sarmat missile, one, not one regiment, not one division. One Sarmat missile, and France disappears, together with England, and maybe parts of Germany. Just one. This isn't a close fight. This isn't going to be France, nickel and diming nuke Russia. One hits and all of France disappears instantaneously. There's no defending against it.
And then it doesn't matter. And then it doesn't matter if they invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
No, that's over at that point. But I'll tell you, Russia is confident with this, that they will destroy Europe in totality and Russia will still exist. And then this is where Karaganov's, thinking is that, the United States won't commit nuclear suicide over this. And I agree. The United States is not encouraging nuclear weapons to Finland and all this. It's a hugely destabilizing, but I also think it's a self-cleansing problem, meaning that when Macron leaves, and he will be gone soon. Le Pen just got cleared by the French Supreme Court. She's now a presidential candidate. And I think she's the next president of France. And she will not allow French nuclear weapons on Finnish soil. She will also undo the stupid French-England nuclear pact. And so there's just things that are going to happen. Europe has been positioning itself to do things it can't do. They've been bragging that they can bench press 315 pounds. But when they pinch the breast, there's 135 pounds, and they can't even get that off. These are weaklings. Europe is a weak continent with no military capability, and even the French nuclear deterrent is a joke. Did you see the former, was it Robertson, the former British Minister of Defense, George Robinson, I think, or George Robertson, or something like that? I know the Kremlin, and I know that the one thing that makes the Kremlin lose sleep at night and sit up and pay attention is the independent British nuclear deterrent. Like, no, really? You really think that the Russians lose sleep over this? They don't. But it also just something interesting. We don't need to dig too much into this because it's premature. But I had an interesting meeting with a Chinese military attaché, and we're starting to have we're having a dialogue about nuclear the nuclear proliferation and arms control in general. The Chinese have been very reticent to talk about arms control. They don't want to play the American game. But the one thing that is clear that if China is going to throw its hat into the arms control ring, it will not do it in isolation, meaning that the French and the British are going to have to be thrown in too. And I think the United States wants the Chinese involved in this discussion. So the idea that France and England are out there flexing muscles they don't have, and at some point in time they're going to be called to heel like the little puppies they are, and the United States is going to work with Russia and China to eliminate the independent French and British nuclear deterrent. They can't afford them. They're very expensive. They're very destabilizing. And again, when Ukraine disappears, and it will disappear, all of this is going to look pretty foolish in retrospect. All of this flexing and expenditure of money is going to look stupid.
Just one really quick comment, Scott. Next time you're in Russia, if you get a chance to talk to somebody really, really high, I worry about the British all the time, the British independent nuclear thing. I mean, you might want to tell this high official what my grandfather told me. He says, Raymond, do you know why the sun never sets on the British Empire? I said, yeah, I know. You don't know. Sit you down, and I'll tell you, the sun never sets on the British Empire because the good Lord would never trust the British in the dark. So pass that along. This independent nuclear capability could be a problem if I know anything about the British.
Sure, but I mean, again, it's the same thing. So they fire. They need to. They don't have the ability to decapitate Russia's nuclear capacity. And so they have to know that this is instant death for everybody in England.
Ours, but to do or die, have a stiff upper lip. I was joking, of course. Joe, we have really kind of aced you out of the conversation here. You've been smiling, and I hope you don't mind us carrying on like this. I've really enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Oh, hi. Yes. Yeah, remember me? Yes. No, I thought it was your grandmother told that story. But speaking of Britain, whereas Scott is pointing out Le Pen in France and AfD in Germany will change policy towards Russia, we have seen, first of all, Andy Burnham was going to take over from Starmer is same policy, but more importantly, Farage, if he overcomes his scandal and resumes as the leader of the Reform Party in Parliament, he's projected to be perhaps the next prime minister, believe it or not, because they've overtaken the Conservatives. And he recently changed his position. He had been critical of Western policy towards Russia, and now he's saying Russia is the biggest threat to Europe. So he sees himself being prime minister, and he thinks he has to change his position. So we may not see that same change in Britain. But Scott, I want to ask you about Poland. Some time ago in this conversation, you talked about Poland sort of getting fed up with Ukraine. There's a story that I missed. It happened on June 20th, where Ukrainians returned. You talked about the Dark Eagle. Well, Ukraine returned. Zelensky returned the order of the White Eagle back to Poland because the Polish criticized the Ukrainians for naming one of their divisions after the Ukrainian insurgent army, the UPA. Of course, they're responsible for killing maybe 100,000 or more Poles during the Second World War. What will happen in terms of Polish designs on Western Ukraine if, in fact, you say Ukraine will disappear, Russia will take Odessa, go all the way maybe to the Romanian border? Will they leave a rump Ukraine where the capital being Lvov, which is really what Ukraine is, isn't it? Kiev being more a Russian city than Ukraine, but Lvov is the center of Ukrainian nationalism and ethnicity, if you could put it that way. What do the Poles do if this happens?
Well, understand the Poles can do nothing unless Russia allows it. So the Ukrainians, Zelensky at one time when he was receiving the Order of the White Eagle from the Poles, and he was considered to be a man of high repute. They went in, they tried to set up some sort of economic union that created sort of a free economic interplay with the West and all this. And the idea was to make Western Ukraine and Poland sort of one. And the reason for that is that they were trying to get Polish peacekeepers to come into Western Ukraine and just to let it happen. And the Russians and the Belarusians put everybody on notice that that's just not the way it's going to play out. And then there's no more talk about that. There was talk about Polish soldiers. If you go talk to the Russians, they'll say that, a lot of Polish speakers on the front lines, a reflection of certain realities. But nothing will happen. Now, Narishkin made an interesting, I think it was last summer, or I can't remember how long ago it was. I think it was last summer, maybe early. No, it was last summer, where Narishkin, they had a conference and they said, they could conceive of Western Ukraine being carved away from Ukraine and handed over to the Poles. There was talk about that. But again, that was back when, Vladimir Putin's gone through certain iterations of, what he would accept in terms of, a diplomatic finale. That statement was made, I think, in June or July of last year, before August. But in August, and I was surprised by this. This is one of the things that surprised me. And Ray, maybe I'd like to know if it surprised you. Because at the time I said there's no way Putin would ever allow for a freezing of the front lines in Kherson and Zaporozhye. That's Russia. But apparently in Alaska, Putin did. That was the concession that he made. He said, give me all of the Donbass and we will freeze the front line in Zaporozhye and Kherson, and we will allow the war to be settled at that point in time. There's a huge concession, one that I was shocked when I heard about it. And I think Narishkin's, talk about, Western Ukraine was, wishful thinking at that time. Today, first of all, Putin's done. He says, and Lavrov said everything, that whatever we agreed to in Alaska is no longer in play. That's not the deal. We're now all in on not just all the territory, but we're in for the security buffer. And as I said, Sumy, Kharkov, and Odessa are now identified by Putin by name as Russian cities. So this is interesting. There's also talk now, about what is the Curzon line. If you go back and you take a look at the lead up to Yalta, the question of where the border should be with Poland was brought up, and Stalin always said that, or Stalin I think said, well, we agree with Lord Curzon where the border should be, fundamentally, but I don't think the Russians are in the mood to give away Western Ukraine. I think the Russians are in the mood to eradicate Banderist ideology. I think the notion of leaving a rump state where the the hateful ideology of Bandera can continue to reside is no longer a politically viable thing. Now, that doesn't mean it can't change back, but in talking to Russians, including a former FSB colonel who defected in 2014, stayed in active service with the Russian FSB, a Russian SBU colonel, I'm sorry, who's now in Russia, and talking to other people, uh, when Vladimir Putin committed to denazification, I think that it's now widely recognized that means there will be zero Banderas left in Ukraine.
Hmm.
And for people to understand and say, well, how could you understand the Russians did this once before? I mean, in 1954, 1955, they killed all of the Banderas or arrested all of the Banderas or drove them all out. There were zero Banderas left in Ukraine. They were all either in the Gulag, in Canada, in the United States, or dead. Um, and then Khrushchev, in his immense wisdom in 1956, declared all the Banderas in the Gulag to be political prisoners, and he released them and allowed them back into Ukraine. And the CIA spent the next 40 years paying them and working with the Banderas diaspora to reinstate, in an underground fashion, the sickness of Banderism. And we see that manifested today with Zelensky's stupidity of reburying Andrei Melnik and renaming Ukrainian military units after him.
Yeah.
The Russians, and again, you have to go to Russia to understand this. This is why I wish there was a way to get more people to go to Russia, because there is no tolerance for Banderism. Ksenia Sobchak tried to defend, no, Banderas, everybody use that term. What are you talking about, Ksenia? They're real. They're real. They exist. You know, but of course she's the one who went to Ukraine shortly after the SMO, and I think stood side by side with Azov and shouted Slava Ukraina, and then later said, I don't understand what I did. Well, you know what you did, Ksenia. You sided with the Banderas, and Russia hates you for this. There is no tolerance in Russia now for this ideology. It's blamed for, and so it won't be allowed to exist. And therefore, I don't see an environment where Western Ukraine gets carved out. For once, I thought that was an attractive idea. Give it to the Poles. But the Poles, if this happens, the Poles have shown a tolerance for keeping this cancer, because this cancer is bad for Russia. Um, and so I don't think the Russians are going to risk that. I think that the solution that's going to happen is that Western Ukraine will remain part of Ukraine, and every Banderas that resides in there will die. And that's where Russia is right now. Understand, there's zero forgiveness in Russia anymore. The concept of Ukrainians are my brother, that only exists in the minds of a few liberal elites. There's nobody in Russia today who says I'm sort of feeling sorry for the Ukrainians. No. And if you're a Banderist, you're going to die. It's 100%. And great, you talked about it. You know what I'm talking about. They're taking names, and those names are dead men walking.
I do, and this is a list more operative, I hope, than the list that you and I are on with respect to the Ukrainians going to. Okay, but look, I think this is a really important problem. People say, this conflict is not going to end in negotiated settlement. Now it's going to be won on the battlefield. Well, that's easy to say, but what happens next, as you already said? And Putin and his associates are looking at this. And, okay, so we go all the way up to the Dnieper. Maybe we even take Kiev in as peaceful a way as we can. What then? So the implication of this, for me, is that the only way they can get some reasonable people in Europe is to keep the United States in and be able to get what's left of the Trump people to try to persuade the Europeans to look, this is really important. We have to get to some sort of negotiated settlement now, since the Russians have won in the East. And the Poles, of course, just really resent. Well, it was only 120,000, right? 120 or 100,000 at Volhynia, massacred Poles in Ukraine, and they're I think today was a celebration when that happened. It's a big deal in Poland. So they hate these Banderas, right? So the twin aim of the special military operation, as we all recall, was demilitarization. That's coming. Maybe even this year. And denazification. That's going to be a really tough job. But when there's no more military, where are the Nazis going to go? I think they're going to go to Lvov, okay? And then the Russians will be faced with a need to make the buffer zone like 100 miles or 100, whatever. So it's a thorny problem. So all I'm saying here is that's in the future. It's not enough to say the war will be won on the battlefield because the Russians don't look at this way. They don't want it to happen again. It's going to happen again if they don't fix this Western Ukraine in a way that there are no Banderas in there, and maybe the Poles will help them with that, but that's for the long future, and that's what the Russians mean when they talk about a new architecture, which they broached to us officially back in December of 2021. And of course, as Jens Stoltenberg said, the Russians, they said, if you keep trying to get Ukraine in NATO, we will have to invade. And so we said no. And so Putin invaded Ukraine. Now, he wanted to stop expansion of NATO, but we got a twofer, Finland, and we got Sweden. By that time, 500,000 young Ukrainians were killed on the battlefield. My God, what kind of leadership do you have like that? And so he admits it was all about NATO. Now, that's in the background of all this stuff. When it ends up, what's left of NATO, if the U.S. is still involved in Europe in some way, and no doubt it will be, then Putin, I think, is still holding out the hope, despite Lavrov and the others, that if he cajoles or if he kind of flatters Trump enough and tells him what a great wife he has and how the 4th of July celebrations, as Putin told Trump, according to Ushakov, he said, oh, the 4th of July celebrations were done as only Donald Trump could do them. They were just fantastic. And his wife is still working on refugee. So they're going to keep massaging him in the hopes that they'll have to deal solely with the Europeans after the war on the battlefield is won. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I may be wrong, but that's my hunch.
Let me just throw something out there that when I was in Donetsk, I got to go visit a unit called the M. Kirvonos unit. It's a Ukrainian unit fighting on the side of Russia. It's bigger than a battalion, let's call it that. Maybe a brigade-sized unit. Now, these are all former Ukrainian armed soldiers. Some are prisoners of war, some are defectors who came over. They've gone through an extensive screening system, verified as being legitimate. They don't fight. They're not part of the Russian Ministry of Defense. They are a Ukrainian army, and they fight for the people of Ukraine. And these guys, they go to the part of the front where Azov is, or where Adar is, because they want to kill Ukrainian nationalists. They go wherever they are. They go up north. They're in because there's several of these units, but they seek out the nationalists and they kill them. They suffer casualties as well. But the point is, I did a presentation. My book Highway to Hell was published in Russian language, so I took advantage of a couple of. Yeah, Ray. Thank you, Ray, for yeah.
I don't get any money for this.
Highway to Hell, but it was published in Russian. I did I'll get you a copy. I'm sorry, Joe. I've been traveling a lot lately, but but I got it published in Russian, and so I've done a couple book events. I did one in Donetsk, in the city of Donetsk, and there were some soldiers there, and they were listening. They asked some questions and all that, and then I saw them the next day when I went to the Kirvonos unit to their training grounds. One of them, there were 4 soldiers there. One of them, at first I didn't know why he was there, because he just had a scowl on his face. He listened to things. Everybody else asked questions. He just scowled. When I tried to talk to him, he just scowled. I mean, I thought, this guy wants to kill me. He's a scowler. Then I went to the unit and he continued to scowl. But after a while, he was a drone operator. And after a while, I think I won him over, because I actually, I'm former military guy. We sat down, we told lies, and I won him over. And in the end, he took the patch off his shoulder and gave me his patch, and he actually smiled on his face a little bit. But I asked somebody later, I said, what's his story? And why has he got an A? She said, well, he just hates everybody. Um, she said he's 22 years old. He's been in the unit for 2 years. He's been wounded 13 times. He's a frontline drone operator. He goes where the fighting is, and he's been blown up 13 times, and 13 times he's come back. The kid's ruined for life. He's just a psychological wasteland. I mean, that's just the reality of war. But he's from Lvov, and
Oh.
he hates the Western Ukrainian nationalists with a passion. It isn't going to be Russia occupying Western Ukraine. It's going to be the Kirvonis battalion. It's going to be other Ukrainian. The Russians are building a Ukrainian army of occupation right now. When this war ends, they will demilitarize, and then they will move in this Ukrainian military that is solely focused on eradicating Banderists. That's all they live to do. This kid, 22 years old, all he wants to do is kill Banderists. That's all he lives for right now. Now, he's going to be ruined for life. I'm not pretending. And I talked to commanders about this. They said this is a problem, especially with drone warfare. The whole psychological concept of drone warfare. It's like snipers. Snipers get to look at their target up close through the lens and then watch their head turn to peak miss. Well, drone operators hunt their targets down and then see their terrified faces the last thing before the drone flies in. And you can only do this a few times before before you become immune. And how do you psychologically deal with it? You dehumanize people and you view this as a computer game and all this. And the best drone operators have just become so desensitized to death because they're just killing. I mean, literally, they're just killing 15, 20 people a day. Boom, 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 boom. And it's a problem. It's a long-term problem. And I talked to the Russians, how are you going to deal with this? They said, well, we got to find a way to use their skills. What we really have to be careful of is when the war ends, they're going to become adrenaline junkies and go off and take their skill set, where somebody needs it, highest bidder. But now we get back to this. The Russians are building a Ukrainian army of occupation that will occupy Ukraine and kill Banderists. I just want people to understand this. This isn't rhetoric. The Banderists are so hated, utterly hated, despised, not just by the Russians, but by many Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are coming over. And when you have demilitarization, there's going to be a significant part of the Ukrainian army that's going to come over and join this Ukrainian army, the new Ukrainian army. And they're going to go in and they're going to kill Banderists. This isn't going to be about Russian soldiers kicking down doors in Lvov. This is going to be about Ukrainians hunting these dogs down and butchering them in the street. So if you're listening to me and you're a Banderist, leave. Go run away to Europe. Go to the United States where they'll take you in Ellenville and they'll put you up and you can train the next generation of Ukrainian American children about the glories of Stepan Bandera, as long as the United States taxpayer allows this to happen. You can go to Australia, you can go to England, but if you stay in Western Ukraine, you're going to die. You're going to be hunted down like the dogs you are. And I met the soldiers that are going to do it, and they hate you. The fact is, they're out there hunting you down right now, and you know it because they're killing you as I speak. These are dedicated Ukrainian patriots, and their numbers are growing and growing and growing as Ukrainians come over, and the Russians have a system to vet them, a very effective system of vetting them. And there's been zero problems. They've had no problems with somebody coming in and being working for the other side. They find them, and I don't need to tell you what happens to somebody who tries to infiltrate this unit. They don't live long. So this is the reality. This is a different war than existed 2 years ago. When I visited the Special Military Operation in January of 2024, the war that I experienced is a completely different war, a completely different war. It's on so many different levels. First of all, the hatred. The level of hatred for Ukrainian nationalists is off the scale. And the level of hatred for Ukrainian drone operators is off the scale too. If you're a Ukrainian drone operator, well, you're probably going to die soon anyways because Rubicon's got your number. But don't surrender. It won't end up well for you because you hunt down civilians. You hunt down civilians. You murder civilians. That's what you do, and the Russians know it, and they know who you are. They know who you are. The operators who fired the drones at Starobelsk, they got your names, guys. They know who you are, and you're going to die. It's just a guarantee. This is the way it is. They're taking names. There will be justice. And it's going to be harsh justice. This is going to end badly for all the Ukrainian nationalists and all the Ukrainian drone operators. Just ask I'm going to butcher his name. Bandera's little lieutenant, Shushkevich or whatever. He ended up getting his brains blown out in a shootout in 1954. That's the fate of every single Banderist. You think you're going to hide. You think you're going to do guerrilla warfare. It's over. They've got your names. They're hunting you down as we speak. And you know this because the guy that you talked to last night's dead. The drone operator you supplied the drone to is dead. The Russians are killing the Ukrainians in numbers that the West refuses to acknowledge. And that's just the reality of the battlefield. This is why you don't see any panic in Vladimir Putin's face. He's not going to tell you that the war isn't hard. I saw too many frontline soldiers say this is a very hard war. It's the hardest. This phase of the war right now is the hardest phase that's existed since Bakhmut. Bakhmut was a different thing, bloody, horrible. But this drone warfare, I'm doing a documentary film called The Gray Zone, and it's going to talk about this. This is a different kind of warfare. The West has no clue. This is another reason why I'm like, what is the West going to do? You're going to put a 5,000 brigade and you're going to die. All of you are going to die before you even get to. The gray zone is 60 kilometers long. Before you can even close with the Russians to begin bringing your direct fire weapons to bear, you're going to go through 55 kilometers of death zone. You're not going to make it to the front line. You're all going to die because you don't know how to fight this war.
Ray, just a moment, Ray. I just wanted to point out that there are no Nazis in Ukraine. The New York Times says so. NewsGuard says so, and it astonishes me that they named a unit after the Ukrainian insurgent army, or that they reburied Melnik. I mean, right in the face of the propaganda of the West that there are no Nazis. The Ukrainians are doing these. Zelensky's doing this himself. Yes, Ray.
Well, the people that Scott's just been talking about are probably lining up to get tickets to Argentina even as we speak. Let me just raise a thing in this last few minutes. The West is saying that Russia's lost, the Ukraine and the Europeans are winning. I'm really confused. I'm really worried about what happens when all of a sudden it dawns on most of the West that this was not true. And how is the West, how are Western leaders going to justify the reality when Russia does its thing, perhaps completing it this fall, when Russia wins? If I'm Putin, I'm thinking about, my God, was this some kind of trick? What do they have up their sleeve they must know we're winning. So can you explain why they're doing this? I mean, it's counterintuitive. I don't have any answer to it, but I do worry about how the Russians look at this. So that was the last thought I had. For what it's worth, not much, perhaps.
Well, no, but it's a fair point. And again, this is the fascinating thing about this topic, because it's a good question. Does the West really believe that Putin is on the verge of collapse? I mean, Gilbert Doctorow certainly believes it. He spouts his bullshit. I'm just here to tell you right now, everything Gilbert said is factually wrong. None of it's real. None of it's real. None of it's real. He can pick up a phone and call his little.
I have to disagree with that. I think that's hyperbole. I think he's a pretty good observer of what the Russians say publicly. I read him carefully. I don't often agree with his latest lines, but not everything he says is false.
Everything he says is false, Ray. Everything. Nothing he says about the state of Putin's government is factually correct. Okay? Any implication that Putin's at risk this September, which is the cornerstone of Gilbert Doctorow's concept right now, that if Putin isn't careful, United Russia will get swept in September. Do you understand how stupid this is? This means this man has no grasp of reality at all about the Russian domestic political dynamic. Vladimir Putin is going to sweep in September because Russia is rallying around him like the Iranians rallied around the supreme leader. And if Gilbert Doctorow can't see that, then he's blind.
I've had discussions with him about this via email, and I'm not so sure, Scott. There's a lot of stuff going on in public in Russia now, and so you may be right, but I think we have to listen to alternative interpretations. The Duma elections are going to be big. I've asked Dr. Rao, how do you see the situation before the elections and after the likely results? We've had some really kind of instructive conversations, me and him. So I'm open to all these things, but I don't think that it's a dead letter. That a lot of Russians are really impatient. And when the head of RT says, "Yeah, we should have done this vчера, yesterday," there is this sentiment. So let's allow 100, what is it, 100 flowers to bloom.
I'm just telling you, Ray, I just came back from Russia.
Right.
Nothing Gilbert Doctorow says is reflective in the reality of Russia. I want to know his sources. Okay, I'll give you my frickin' sources. I'll tell you who I spoke to. I'll tell you who I met with. I want to know Gilbert Doctorow's sources. And I also want to know about what the fuck he does in Brussels. Who pays him? Okay, I want to know why this MI6 operative is allowed to do whatever the hell he does. All right.
Okay. Well, that's. I mean, Joe, you have to get him on here with.
I definitely have to get him on to respond to that and to debate you, Scott, if he's willing to do it. I definitely need him to respond because we're giving you a platform to say this about him. But what I know about Gilbert is, well, a few things, but one is that he's attuned to the media there. He watches the TV shows and he translates the stuff. That's what he used to do for Bob Perry in Consortium News. He was writing stuff like that. But anyway, I want to move on to Iran. If I want to ask you, Scott, what was the name of this unit you said that's dedicated to fighting the Banders? Is there a name?
It's not a nickname. The name is the M. Bonus Battalion.
MK, like MK Ultra? MK Ultra.
No, not FK. That's our business there, Joe. Come on.
That's ours.
This is the patch of their drone unit.
Oh, I see. Wow. Oh, Jesus.
And they're
Are they the baddies or are we the baddies? I mean,
let me. Yeah,
I wouldn't want to go up against them on the field of battle if I were Azov. I'll tell you that.
That's fascinating. I had no idea. That's really news that you broke for me anyway about this unit, and it's fascinating. So I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about Iran. Please, Scott, we'll go with you first. Can you explain what is your understanding of what is happening right now in this ridiculous, continuously turning events where there's threats from Trump, then there's negotiations, and there's exchange of fire, then it's back to, I mean, it's getting a bit absurd. How do you see what's happening right now?
Hybrid diplomacy.
Uh-huh.
This was the MOU was never an MOU,
Right.
and the Iranians never viewed it as such. The Iranians basically said, "We know the United States is going to violate this." The United States never was in compliance with the MOU ever. Understand? I forget what article it was, but you're not allowed to threaten the use of force. Day one, Donald Trump, we're going to blow you into hell if you don't do what we want you to do. The MOU was always fatally flawed. 60 days of we're all going to agree to a ceasefire, but in 60 days, the Iranians have to basically concede everything that we couldn't get up front. The Ukrainians were never going to concede on any of these issues, zero. And not the Ukrainians, the Iranians. And they knew this. The Iranians knew this. But the Iranians went along with this. Why? So they could sell 60 million barrels of oil. And they did. And they got it to market and they made money. And the United States did this as well, kept it going, even though we had no intention. Remember J.D. Vance? The MOU, we're just buying time to get some oil in the recharge our tanks, and then we're going to do it. So it was always a lie, always a lie. And this is the permanent state that we're in right now. Neither side is going to fully commit to war. The United States and because if the Iranians actually did what they promised to do, they'd be blowing the crap out of everybody right now. One violation, we're coming in hard. But instead, they do this tit for tat, and then they both stop. Some ships go through, some oil gets sold, and then they do the thing. Now, this is the permanent state right now, that this is the way it's going to be. Until one side, and the United States has got nothing. What do we have? What do we have? We don't have the ability to launch another 39-day war against Iran. We don't have the ammunition at all. The Iranians, on the other hand, can not only fire missiles, but they can shut down both the Strait of Hormuz. Just shut down tonight. It's gone. You do know that, right? The Oman, the little secret corridor the United States tried to cut, it doesn't work anymore. It's been mined. Nothing's going through there. So if you want to go through the Strait of Hormuz, you have to go through the Iranians and pay the Iranian price, and they'll let you go through if the United States doesn't sink you in the meantime. So what is the United States going to do? Put up another naval blockade? When they do that, the Bab el-Mandeb could be shut down. And then Saudi Arabia is going to be screaming bloody murder because they have no oil going to market. And that means nobody has oil going to market. And then the global economy is going to do what it was headed to, and Trump's going to have to yield again. And this is the cycle we're going to see. And both sides are going to play it. Iran's going to play it until which time they can solidify their diplomatic and economic base of support in the East. They're making that strategic pivot to the East. And once they can get that solidified, then the United States becomes irrelevant. And at some point in time, the Gulf Arab states are going to tell the United States, we can't sustain this model anymore. It's an unsustainable model. When Kuwait runs out of money, when Bahrain runs out of money, when Saudi Arabia runs out of money, and they'll run out of money because they can't sell oil. Right now, they have a temporary reprieve. Hybrid diplomacy, fake diplomacy, taking advantage of a moment. But it's unsustainable over time. And I do believe at some point in time, the Iranians are going to shut both the Strait and shut Bab el-Mandeb, and the United States will be compelled into modifying its stance. But the Iranians are never going to give Trump what he wants on nuclear. Never going to give him what he wants on nuclear, which is total abdication, surrender. And Trump is unable to accept anything less than that. So that issue alone is going, unless they can find a way to punt that issue down the road, which might be the solution. Just stop talking about it. Say it's an indefinite problem. That could be a solution. Strait of Hormuz, Trump is going to have to accept the fact that Iran is in control. Iran will not yield on this issue. And then we're about to see the Bab el-Mandeb become a factor. The Houthi are fed up with the Saudis. The Saudis tried to shoot down an airplane that was bringing in that was landing and it was going to take a delegation to the funeral of Ali Khamenei. And the Houthi said, if you do this, Saudi Arabia is going to come under risk. And so now the Saudis have activated their Yemen, government allies, and there's a war going on. The Houthi may just get fed up and say we're shutting down the Bab el-Mandeb because that's their strategic cartoon. There's nothing the United States can do about that. People need to understand we have zero military capacity of any meaningful. Okay, we can send ATACMS, we can send HIMARS, we can blow up a couple things. This is not war-winning stuff that we're doing. It's not. We did this for 39 days.